All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Brick Cave Media. Now, I have come up with a whole new name for what we're doing with these little online panels. I'm calling them the Webcast in Event Zoomopolis events. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to the Brick Cave panel. Can you separate the writer from the work with Louise Robertson and Sharon Skinner? My name is Bob Nelson. Based in Mesa, Arizona, Brick Cave Media is a publisher of science fiction, fantasy, poetry, and curiosities. Titles published include the latest books from our speakers today, The Experiment known as Rosemary Hernandez Williamson, a science fiction book from Louise Robertson, and The Exile's Gift, a fantasy from Sharon Skinner. Both are available from your favorite bookstore or online at brickcavemedia.com. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about our panelists before we get started today. Sharon Skinner. Sharon holds a BA in English, an MA in creative writing, and a poetic license. She's worked as a landscaper, a cashier, a maid, a waitress, a communication specialist, a videographer, a technical writer, a project management consultant, a biofield medical service engineer, and served aboard the USS Jason as one of the first women assigned to a U.S. Navy ship. Her poetry and fiction have been published in myriad local, national, and international publications. Sharon is an active member of SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and currently serves as the regional advisor for SCBWI Arizona. Louise Robertson has earned degrees, a BA Oberlin, MFA from George Mason University, poetry publications, including Pudding Magazine, Crack the Spine, Borderline, among others, and poetry awards. Mary Roberts Rinehart, Columbus Arts Festival Poetry Competition twice, among others. She has slammed both at the regional and national level, and someone once said about her that underneath it all, she's kind. We do ask, well, it's just you, Paul, so I'm not even going to bother saying that next part. With that, I would like to go ahead and welcome our panelists and turn it over to them. So welcome to you, Sharon, and welcome to you, Louise.
Thanks for having me. Us.
Yeah, happy to be here. So Louise, it's late where you are. I see you're drinking your coffee, so you can stay awake. I hope we can keep everyone awake. I'm kind of interested to hear your take on this topic. I'm very. I will say that this topic of can you separate the writer from the work or the artist from the art, that is always timely. There's always, but right now, I think it's even more timely than ever because we've had so much stuff in the news lately about the way that people are speaking in and being in the world that is maybe not how we want our creators to be in the world. If you know it, so really, I guess I don't know if you read the open letter to J.K. Rowling that someone published recently, but they were calling her out on her anti-trans statements that she's made. And what was interesting to me is that in the letter, the person who was calling her out on this was talking about how this has gone on for a number of years, and it was under my radar. I totally have to admit that this went right under my radar, and I feel like, again, I'm getting gobsmacked with stuff I really should be more alert to in the world. I'm trying, but I, it's that kind of a thing. And so now when we think of Harry Potter and we start to read Harry Potter, and we see it in a different light. We see the characters from a different perspective, and we see some of the narrative intrusion, perhaps, that takes place that we might not have recognized otherwise. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think in the wake of the Me Too movement, we've all become a lot more sophisticated. And so while you're right, exactly, I totally agree. This is an evergreen topic. And we can still bounce from looking at past authors who are gone, their work and body is closed, to current authors. J.K. Rowling, I did read that letter. She commits another sin, so to speak, that a lot of people tend to are criticizing more and more that she seems to want to backwards make her writing more inclusive. Like, oh, Hermione's black. Hermione is not black. She did not write her that way. You can't retroactively make yourself more woke. So like J.K. Rowling's is great because like she does have the anti-trans things, and she does have this body of work with like Dobby's a veritable slave, you know, like what is that? Why is that there? That she never addresses the really problematic things, but also she is not sophisticated enough to say mea culpa. I wrote what I wrote. That's what it was. That's who I was. I hope I'm better, you know. And time and again, we see like when it's funny when Louis C.K. got in so much trouble. I'm like, oh, here's an intelligent guy. Let's see what he has to say. He might actually come up with something intelligent. And yet he didn't really. He just said, oh, you guys, poor little me. And he whimpered, you know. So J.K. Rowling is just such a perfect storm of past mistakes, the inability to know how to just say, it is what it is, and move on. And then also like even more problematic stuff. So I like that you brought her up. Yeah.
Well, she's in the news, so she's really in the forefront right now. She's on my mind, partly because I missed some of that early on, and I'm a person who is I'm working all the time to try and learn things and grow. I want to be a lifelong learner. I want to be paying attention. I mean, it's one thing for me to look at, say, Marion Zimmer Bradley. Marion Zimmer Bradley, who I adored her Mists of Avalon. I was so involved in her worlds and her story and her feminism, right? And coming at the Arthurian story from a feminist perspective. And it was, you know, and then we find out she was a child abuser and a child molester. I'm like, I have her. So here's my dilemma. I already owned her books. They were already on my shelf.
Yes.
They were such a formative part of who I am as a writer myself in fantasy and strong female heroes. Hi, John. And yet I can't read them anymore. I can't go in and read the stories anymore, especially, you know, I had already had some trouble with the whole incest component, but it was true to the myth. And yet now I find it really, really difficult to even consider cracking the spine of that book again.
You bring up a really good point, because you have texts that are problematic and lives that are problematic. You know, like you can, like, the person I have the most trouble with right now is Hyland. Like, I've read it all. He changed my life with Friday because it was a female character. You didn't see too many of those. I'm like, oh my God, it's a female character. Oh my God, I feel so validated. Tried to go read it. It's so, like, I tried Stranger in Strangeland again. Could not do it. It was so sexist. But that's the work, and we can take the work.
But for his time, he was actually writing some feminist literature.
Yeah.
He's a confusing guy for us, because as women, especially because he did have strong female heroes, but then he sexualized them and he objectified them because and to a point he was a man of his time. So, you know, there's a piece of that. But there was also the incest component in a couple of his books that was problematic. The time travel one, where the 11-year-old girl ends up marrying the 30-year-old guy after she comes of age because they felt right. So there are some problems, but again, you know, he also was a liberal when he started writing. He was very liberal. He moved to conservatism, but he started writing as a liberal, and so a lot of his ideas were liberal ideas that we embraced, and especially for our time and our age. I was a teenager when I started reading Heinlein, so you know, for the time and who we were and who, you know.
You're right. He was progressive, but it's And you're right, you have to put him in his time. He was progressive, and he was hailed for even having, like, if you look at some of his contemporaries, women were just bimbos lying around to be tripped over and sexed up, you know, like, and yet you read it, they're very rapey, they're like, and also my consciousness when I was reading them was not like, it went over my head. I recently told somebody about one of my very favorite books, Alfred Bester, The Star's My Destination. I hadn't read it for 20, 30 years, and she reads it, my friend, and she goes, oh, that's very rapey, and I'm like, I guess, but it was
okay. So let's, let's segue real quick into, okay, we're talking about writers. I'm trying to stay focused on writers, but John Wayne. So you want to talk about somebody who's super problematic and white supremacist, homophobic, and his films were very rapey, like The Quiet Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or as a matter of fact, you want to go even a step further when he played Genghis Khan.
I didn't see it, but I believe you.
Oh no, it is beyond the pale, and not to mention the fact that they had to paint him up to make it, and his eyes to make him look Asian. There's a whole. It's just not. It's not pretty, and you think back to that, and that's the stuff we were growing up on, and that's the stuff that was normalizing that kind of behavior in our world. So for us, especially as women, it's been a journey of many steps to push past that that kind of worldview.
Yeah, John Wayne is interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting about it's causing a furor about the airport. You mentioned it, I think, in your emails, like, but he's an actor. Like, right? I think,
but he's an icon. He's an American icon of actors, right?
I guess Ronald Reagan has an airport too, and he was an actor as well. But but and John Wayne, I know in his personal life was very problematic. He was overtly racist, overtly white supremacist. And then also, but the work he did was somebody else's writing too. So it's not pure John Wayne on the screen. And I think we can engage in a little more of relativism, like the past is a different land. I forget who says that. The culture is different. You have to understand where and when things are. But even there, you do know that other people were capable of rising above it. So, they might get a pass, but it's like getting a C+, I guess, I
guess. Well, okay, so Orson Scott Card, I won't read him.
Yeah, right? I read a lot of his books.
and I won't go near him anymore. But so what that leads me to is to say, back to, I still have some of these books on my shelf, like Marion Zimmer Bradley's books. I haven't been able to part with them because they had meaning, and because I'm a little bit on the hoarder side anyway with books, especially. I have trouble parting with books, but now I can't read it, but it's sitting on my shelf, right? So where do we draw the line about, I want my dollars to go to people I support and whose beliefs I support, and who I agree with in the ways of the world that I think that my worldview match with. So here we are. We know about, I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on in the science fiction and fantasy world right now, but there's a whole lot of stuff coming out about some particular male authors who have sexually harassed and bullied female creators and authors, especially at cons and things like that. And I've met a couple of these people and didn't like them when I met them, couldn't read their work anyway. So for me, that it's like, oh, well, I wasn't going to read their books anyway, right? But had I been a person who was reading their books, now what do I do, right? Do I just, for me, I want my money to support people whose worldview matches mine. So I don't want to buy their books. I don't want to support them because I don't want to support that type of world attitude and that kind of behavior. But it becomes problematic because you can put your money where you feel comfortable putting your money, but where do we draw the line, and how does that play into cancel culture? Cancel culture. So cancel culture, which is the new thing that people do where they just like cancel people out, or they're trying to cancel people out on Twitter and the social media and all this. This is a very new kind of thing to me. Are you familiar with cancel culture?
Yeah, I think that it's always been around to some extent. We have, I mean, Twitter's an outrage machine, you know, so they're ready. They are ready to get outraged. And I think like with a lot of things, people who get canceled, I mentioned Louis C.K., Aziz Ansari, like people kind of evolve into the next thing. Rarely do people, like, look at Woody Allen. Woody Allen should be totally canceled. Like, and he is, and then he isn't. So, you know, people, you know, and I personally find if I really have a problem with somebody, I can't read them. So I don't, you know, and I think, you know, that's just something, you know, but the complication is nobody's perfect. You know, you can go through and find a picture of me in a kimono. What the hell was I doing that for? Well, a white guy pressured me into doing it, but there I am, you know, in a kimono, and I'm embarrassed to tell. I look embarrassed. I was embarrassed. I was doing something I wouldn't have done now, would have been more forceful with now, with more thinking about it. So, you know, I feel like the cancel culture, while it's there, it's always been kind of there. You know, people have always discovered something about people and then decided to, you know, react strongly and you know, I'm trying to think of, Pee Wee Herman. He got canceled a long time ago. You know, but I do think that with Twitter especially is an outrage machine, and that they're always looking for somebody or something to chew up and spit out and be angry about.
Well, I think too, though, that we know more now about our creators and our heroes, and you know, we see more of them in the world. For example, Mel Gibson, right? I will not watch another Mel Gibson movie. I don't even care if it's a rerun. I don't want them to count me as a tick on, you know, something shit. Or Kevin Sorbo. You know, I was a big fan of Xena and Hercules and all that stuff. And now I cannot watch Kevin Sorbo at all. And I own those. Again, I'm looking at them going, well, I can't even sell these because that's not appropriate. I can't take them to the used bookstore. I feel like that I'm just dumping ugly on somebody else. I'm like, what do you do with this stuff, right?
Right.
What do you do? That we know so much more because of media and social media and all of that. So if we didn't know, because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah, it would be out there anyway. You know, Walt Disney and his anti-Semitism totally influenced massive portions of the American culture. He's a bad example because he lived in a time where there were a lot of anti-Semites, and it wasn't like he was closeted or secret, and it influenced anything. I think that I agree with you. You don't want to sell something because then it pushes the information out there. You don't want to destroy because it just seems a little wrong to destroy. I do have my offending books. I keep them. They're good as references when I need to look up and say, look at this scene. There it is. That's where it happens.
Well, they're good mentor texts for what not to do. As I tell my workshop students, there are mentor texts that you use to influence how you write, and there are mentor texts that you use to influence how you don't write.
Yeah, and there's a scene in a Game of Thrones book that is so horrendously badly written that it's my lovely example. I love having this example of how not to write women. You know, like it's in one of the first books. The mother walks across a courtyard, and I believe the text, to paraphrase, says something from her point of view. She's thinking that she's carrying her breasts across the courtyard, and it's like,
that's so
really? Really, that's what you think
yeah,
was
that
going
is
through her head?
so,
Like, like
yeah.
what? In a basket.
Well, that goes back to something that Linda Sue Park talks about. I don't know if you're familiar with Linda Sue Park. She's very well known in the kidlit arena. She wrote Long Walk to Water, which is a fabulous nonfiction book, but it's kind of storyized about two rival tribes in Africa, in a part of Africa, and their struggle to get water to the village. It's a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. But Linda Sue Park talks about writing outside your lane, right? And she has this wonderful way of describing it. And I think, I don't think it was Jason Reynolds, it was Kwame who said, talks about your kitchen table, right? And you picture the people around your kitchen table. And the way that Linda Sue Park kind of pulled that kitchen table analogy up forward and talks about it for writing is she says that if you are sitting around the kitchen table and having a meal with certain individuals, those are the individuals that you can feel free to write about, you can feel free to include in your book, you can feel comfortable that you are writing from inside your lane. Those are the people that you know well enough and intimately enough to write those stories. If you have someone whose kitchen table you've sat at or who's sat at your kitchen table, you know enough about them to maybe know enough to include them as a character, but not as a primary or secondary character in your book. And you still need to do your homework on understanding their culture and understanding who they are as a person to be included. And then if there are people that are not seated at your table and you haven't ever sat at their kitchen table and had a meal with them, maybe not. Maybe you should think about not writing or trying to write them into your story or writing your story. So that goes back to the whole, what do you, writing a very bad woman from a men's perspective. If you're writing that far outside your lane that you can't even get that right,
yeah,
that's problematic.
He's not a woman at his table. I think he just like it just was a bridge too far for him. A lot of men have trouble. I don't really understand why they think they have to write us so differently than themselves, but
we're not
cultural
imposition. We're strange creatures.
Yeah, mysterious and unknowable. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy. And I also think that, like, if you, as a writer, I'm a white writer, and if I want to support, I can have Black characters. There's plenty of Black people have been at my table. I can, lots of diversity in my friends. I have a lot of affection for them and cultures that they have. But it's also true that if I want to support, and I can always amplify the voices of someone else. I mean, like, I don't always have to only support by writing the character. So that is another way that sometimes writers don't realize. Sometimes you throw the ball to somebody else and let them run with it.
And that. I'm so glad you said that, because that's one of the things that Linda Sue talks about. If it's somebody who's not at your table and you haven't been at their table, maybe, just maybe, you throw the ball to somebody else and say, this is not my story to write, but I have this, story that I think should be in the world. So, and I believe that it was Kwame Alexander who came up with the kitchen table analogy to begin with, and it was Linda Sue Park who I saw talk more deeply about it. Thank you. It took me a second to get the names, but
yeah. But also, I know that in my book, I had it forward about 100 years, and I had assumed that the cultures had blended a little. So I put in people I knew and were friends with. They weren't in the book, but characters, similar backgrounds were in the book. Some of them were modeled after people I knew, or so I did. But I was trying to put like a non all white cast in there. And
right.
So even the main character is half Puerto Rican, but she's sort of the second generation. And I know a lot of second generation immigrants, like they're not immigrants, but you know, their grandparents, and I talked to some of them just to see how they feel about things. So, you know, but I also kind of wanted to magically make Puerto Rico a state, and you know, like I don't know,
Well,
I just have
yeah.
like Puerto Rico. So that was there, you know.
Well, that goes back to that. If you've had them at your table, yes, but maybe you need to dig deeper and do more research. And it sounds like you have. It sounds like when you went to include people of that culture, that you dug deeper, and that's really, I think, kind of the gist of that whole table, kitchen table.
Well, I had the out of having the culture of the spaceship. That was the main culture for her. So, you know,
yeah,
I could, and that's one of the struggles that a second generation Americans sometimes talk about, is having that disconnect from their grandparents' culture. And so actually I wrote that into the book a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So metaphorically on the spaceship, but it wasn't really about that, but that was kind of what was behind that. Yeah. But, you know, I think that what we're talking about introduces some of the ways writers are really diving deeper into these issues for themselves. Like, I think 10 years ago, I would have written something else, or I might have gone harder in a different way, and then hopefully evolved out of that. And
well, yeah, to your point, what's the book, Ember Days, or what's the name of that book? So there's a YA author who just pulled a book because she was writing, she's from the South, and she was writing about a Gucci culture, about the Gucci culture, and she's not of that culture. And she was writing about a conjure woman, and she has no direct experience with that. So she was trying to take the folksy, folk tale type of Gucci conjure woman story, and they actually just pulled the book. It was just supposed to be released in the next couple of months, and they did a cover reveal, and she decided to pull it. And to me, that's guts. That's some bravery right there. That's owning it.
Oh,
that's
and a
really,
risk too.
Yeah.
I'm going to fly in something that's a well-known way of thinking about things from poetry that I think people can use as a strategy. And ever since I heard about it in college, there's something called poetry of witness. And I always felt like it gave me permission to witness something. I'm not going to take somebody's experience away. I'm not going to try to speak instead of somebody, but I certainly am allowed to witness and approach things that way. You know, I think that's something we need to think about. We can't, like, I'm not going to make all of my books all white just because I'm white, you know, but just I have to learn to draw the line of where I can inhabit and speak for or instead of someone. Because I've always sort of abhorred the idea, like I've heard plenty of writers say things like, I speak for, and I speak, you know, and I'm like, well, no, you speak for yourself. That person can speak for themselves, you know, but you are allowed to witness things. And it's been a very powerful thing for
that's
me.
a great way to look at it, because you can't be inside someone else's skin. Yeah. But you can witness. You know, my books are populated with a lot of people who are not cis white, you know, gender people, and part of it is that's because that's the real world. I want real world reflection, but of course my books are not about the issues around their differences. They just happen to live in the world. They exist in my world, and I work very hard to make them real people, because I want because in my world those people exist. I've had those people sit at my table. I've sat at their tables. You know, those people are part of my world. And so I do populate my world with people who are not just like me. And I think that that's important. I do think that own voices is critical. And I think that that's playing an important role. And I know that when we talk about it in the kidlit world, I've had people push back on it. And my response is, no, nobody's asking you to get up from the table and leave. They're just asking you to add a chair, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
they just
Well,
want you to add a
Paul
chair.
has asked or made a comment, and I really like the point he brings up. He says, whenever I see a TV show with a disabled character, the writers think the character's main goal is to walk. And that's the kind of nuance somebody who is able, or ableist doesn't even grasp, because they're so far outside of that experience, they don't even know that nuance. And this is a little bit divergent from this. I'll bring up 2 TV shows. One is the very popular Frankie and Grace, I think, the one with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin.
Okay.
And then their ex-husbands are gay and they get married, but both straight people are playing the gay couple, and you just feel it's a little shallow, it's a little one-dimensional. There's something about the relationship. And then I'm going to compare it to a British comedy called Vicious, that is hilarious, and it has a gay couple, and it's played by the guy who was Magneto. I'm trying to remember, it's just a romp, as it were, but there's so much nuance in the characters because it's authentically portrayed and authentically written. And like the more feminine character, at one point they're planning a wedding and he goes, "I am a man," and it's like, that's the kind of nuance a straight writer wouldn't understand, how to insist on the gender from inside a contract they're unfamiliar with. Yeah. And Paul adds, all other aspects are glossed over, right? Because when you're ableist, you're sort of mono focused on like the one thing, that's all they see. So that's a really good point, Paul.
Yeah, I think.
And I'd like to add, this just happened today. A friend of mine, an author I knew in college, put out on Facebook, he writes, "What topic should I write for a cast all women over 40? And I want to say, Peter, I did say, get a partner who's a woman over 40. Like, how are you doing? Like, all these beautiful friends of his, women over 40 and 50, gave him all this wonderful advice. It's like, all the advice wasn't the same, but each was authentically nuanced. I'm like, you can pick any of these wonderful women who are trying to help you, because any of these perspectives is going to be more than yours." I don't know. He didn't respond.
Well, and I think going back to what Paul was talking about is, the whole idea that we only see people in one aspect. We see one aspect and we see it through our own lens. We don't see it through other people's lenses, right?
Yeah. And that's it's, I like what you were talking about, making sure to include like a diverse cast. That way you can have people, at least they're there in the room, and you can, always interview to try to flesh it out. But yeah.
Sometimes he has to turn a show off. And they talk about a person that wants to walk, or the idea is that the person said if they can't walk, they don't want to live. And so then Paul says, when they look at me, they think that I feel like I want to die or something. I think,
Wow,
it's not worth living if I'm in this condition, is what they're kind of saying when he hears when someone says that. When he writes about a new character, he tries to find out about the background of that group.
That's a really good point too, because Paul, you lead a hugely full life. I mean, you've got multiple degrees, and you're working on your second book. I mean, you're leading an extremely full life. You're not letting this, hold you back. And the idea that, oh, just because you are differently abled or have some sort of a disability that you wouldn't want to live I think it's offensive, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's like carrying my breasts across the room, offensive, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a good point. Yeah, I think we've kind of gotten off topic from where we started a little bit. But this has been a great discussion. I really, I know we were trying to, so really to kind of push us back on topic, it comes back to, can you separate the writer from their work, but also if as a writer, we need to be authentic, right? We need to make sure that what we're doing, not only in our work, but in the world is authentic, right? I try to be a really good human being. I try to be authentic in the world. I know that my beliefs probably don't line up with just everybody's. I'm sure they don't. I have some, pretty liberal ideas about stuff, but I also think that my work reflects that, and it reflects my worldview. And I think that that's really important.
Yeah, I also think, like with the authors that I read, it's okay to let them evolve into another kind of person. I understand that people make mistakes. Sometimes you can't get past it. Like, I cannot read certain authors anymore. Like you were saying, you can't, like, everybody has their line, but it is okay. To me, it's important when people can grow. And
yes, if you own your stuff, if you will, if you can own it and learn from it and grow, I grant a huge level of respect to that. That one of these names that's being put out in the science fiction and fantasy community as one of these authors who's being called out for their behavior against women at cons and things like that, has actually apologized very sincerely. Now, do I know him? No. Do I know if his behavior has changed? No. But, that goes back to that whole thing that I was asking about cancel culture, because I was watching a podcast or a vidcast called Breakfast Club, and there was a gentleman on there, I think his name was Michael Eric Dyson, and he was talking about you can't cancel people. People cannot be canceled. Cancel culture doesn't really exist. You can't technically cancel anybody. You can ignore them. You personally cannot support them in their efforts, but you as a person, you can't cancel them. People are not cancelable. And I found that to be really kind of mind-blowing for me.
Yeah,
but
true. People can lose their jobs. That people can and have lost jobs. And I'm thinking of blanking on his name, but he's a writer. I'll segue to a different point. Kurt Vonnegut, fantastic writer, one of my faves, big influence on my life. I was reading his personal essays, and I'm like, hold on, you have a real problem with mothers and women. And I'm like, but it's not really, he transcends it in his work. Like I don't remember, maybe I'm wrong, but he doesn't have a problematic women in his work all the time. I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess I kind of handed to Vonnegut that he had these issues. I don't know. It's very weird to read.
I think as writers, there's always a autobiographical components to our work, right? And I write, after about the third or fourth book, I looked down and I went, oh, I write about mother-daughter issues. I wonder why, not that I have anything to work out, right?
Yeah. Well, okay. And another twist is I was trying to think of Alexei Sherman. Well known. He wrote his best known book is The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, right?
Right.
wonderful to have. He's a great writer, wonderful to be able to, like, just one more wonderful star in the galaxy of many wonderful writers. I read his most recent memoir essay book, and he went in really hard on being an ally, into the paint, very deep, up to his neck, whatever metaphor you want to use. He was there. He had all these solemn things to say about rape and men abusing women, the whole book. And then it comes out. Do you know where this is going? It's like, okay, I see what you've done, and you made the same moves a lot of men have done. Position of power, you try to use it to get sex, you try to use it to get people, but you just spent a whole book pretending to be an ally. You know, Aziz Ansari kind of did that too, but not so deep in either direction. He had this whole, his show he was like very ally, and then it comes out, hey, he's a complete dickwad. Excuse me. He is, I don't know how much you're going to edit this.
So not a child's program now.
Yeah, he had a problematic date. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
So
it really, for me, it does impact. For me, it's hard to separate. I mean, I guess the bottom line for me is that it's hard to separate once you know things about a person. It's hard to separate them from the art, right?
It sounds like to allow for a little moral relativism.
Right, and especially if you start to read deeper, and because of the stuff, and you don't even have to read deeper. Some of that stuff just jumps off the page and slaps you in the face that you probably didn't see before. Now it's like in your face. How did I not see this? But it's those nuances.
Yeah.
And it goes back to how we view art and how we read and how we come to story. And every single one of us comes with our own set of lenses that we see the work through. So I always tell the story about if I were an artist and I painted this great masterpiece, in my opinion, this beautiful painting, and someone bought it from the gallery, and then I one day met that person and they were like, oh, I love your work. I own one of your paintings. It's my favorite painting. I have it in a place of pride in my house. And they show me a picture of where the painting is, and it's in the middle of their living room. It's like covering the wall, and it's upside down. What do I say to that person, right? What do I say to that person? I would say, I'm so glad you love my work. Thank you for being a fan of my work. I so appreciate it. Would I ever tell them it was upside down? Hell no, because they are seeing my work through their lens and they love it. So so I have readers who read at different levels of when they read my books, and they go deep, some of them, and some don't go very deep, but they all love the work, or they at least enjoy the read. And for me, you're coming with your own lens, you're coming with your own worldview, you're coming with your own, everything that you've lived through and what's brought you to this place, and you're seeing my work and you have somehow resonated with my work. I'm okay with however that is. I'm okay with it, because I want that connection. That's what the work is about for me in my books, is making an emotional connection with people. I'm not specific about what emotional connection I'm making. That's for them.
I think my motivation is to build a world, and that's, maybe I haven't thought about it as much as you have, but ideally I want to build a world and live in it, and make interesting things happen. The novel doesn't really have a villain, but the next one kind of does, but they all mostly have cold heart, whatever world building happens. That's one of the most interesting. Like, I did the short story for the anthology, and that was like a pure world building exercise, and I loved it. So that's a huge motivation to me. I just really love to create worlds and make them cool and live in them. And then you invite people to live in them with me too. Yeah. And I know that a lot of people, there's a couple of professors who teach my poetry, and I occasionally know what the students have written about my work, and sometimes I'm like, all right, okay.
Well,
But I'm glad you're there.
that's like the critics who said that Robert Frost's poem "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening" was about death, and he kept saying no, it's not. It's about stopping by.
But what you're saying is people get what they get out of it, and if you have a rich tapestry, I mean, I hate to make this analogy, but SpongeBob SquarePants, you can watch it as a child because it's pretty colors. You can be a little bit older and snarky, and then you can be an adult there identifying with Squidward the whole time, sarcastic. This isn't my idea. I'm totally ripping somebody off. I can't remember who though. But it's art. Like, people get what they get, and then you set it free in the world, and it has to be free. Yeah. Oh, but I did want to swing in another issue that you touched on when we were talking about past authors and being used to a certain world. I recently I read and reread a couple of the books out of a series, the Murderbot series by Martha Wells, and she's insisted on having gender parity. Like, the number of men and women are both matches the real world. And it's almost mind-blowing because I'm like, why are there so many women in this book? No. It's just I'm used to reading books where it's mostly 80% men. And I've gone around, I have this term, dudeland. Sorry if I'm overemphasizing one lens right now, but like Dudeland is a show or something where it's like, it's all dudes, it's too many dudes, and it's not like the military or something where it probably should be Dudeland, but sometimes it's just like, what? And I even bring this lens sometimes to old TV shows, and some of them have gender parity and some of them don't. It's interesting to see. But Martha Wells does a great job.
That's
very
a good
human
point.
People.
It's a really good point, because we want our worlds to seem real, right?
Yeah.
I do. When I'm world building, I want people to get immersed and think they're there. I mean, I want it to be realistic enough that it's believable, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so it's but we're also fighting the cultural expectations of our audience too. Yeah.
All right.
Any questions?
I'm going to start to dial us back in a little bit. Paul, are you working on a question? Were you going to type in a question? Because I was going to give you a chance. Nope, you're good? Okay. So let me give you guys a minute to kind of close up a little bit, and that way just say thank you for being here. So if you guys, Sharon.
Well, thank you, Louise, for staying up late with us and joining us all the way from the other side of the country. And thank you, Paul, for hanging with us the whole time and sharing your perspective, because that's valuable. And thank you, Bob, for making this all happen. In closing, I guess my takeaway from this is that once I know what I know, I can't unknow it. And I come to the work differently. And so depending on how egregious I believe the boundary of the overreach or the inappropriate behavior or the statements in the world are, or the person's worldview butts up against mine, I guess that the more egregious I feel it is, the more I'm going to see it in the work and relate it to the work and have trouble with the work. So I don't know that I can separate the artist from the art, the writer from the work.
I have a similar takeaway. At a certain point, I can't help but have trouble reading any or viewing any kind of artistic endeavor if I know that they behaved in a despicable way, although I'm willing to engage in some moral relativism with past lives, and I'm willing to forgive as people do things wrong and are honest with themselves and the world. So I'm open to all that stuff. I'm also completely willing to learn from the sons of guns. Like I'm willing to learn from the way that there are geniuses in every population, and I'm willing to learn from the geniuses in another population, like all the white cisgendered straight men out there. I will learn and then go on and do my own thing. Thank you for having me, and thank you guys for, it's such a delight to talk with people who are so well versed in the issues and what's out there. Thank you.
I just scheduled a Zoom. I'm not smart at all.
This has been great. Because Louise,
you
and I
both.
haven't been able to talk since the last time you were out for a book festival. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So thank you both again for listening, and thank you to our audience for being here for this edition of the Brick Cave Webcastinar Event Zoomopolis. I got it right. Oh. Entitled, Can You Separate the Writer from the Work with Louise Robertson and Sharon Skinner? The archive of this video will be made available to viewers and subscribers of the Brick Cave YouTube page, and the audio will be released as a Brick Cave podcast. Thank you again to our guests, Sharon Skinner and Louise Robertson, for taking the time to be with us tonight. Sharon can be found online at sharonskinner.com, and you can support Louise through her Patreon at patreon.com/Louise Robertson. So always feel free to support our artists. Of course, their books are available at your favorite bookstore, or you can order them direct online from brickcavemedia.com. With that, I will turn off the recording, and I'm going to let you guys just kind of keep going if you want. So, and bam.